I'll answer whenever you ask me.
It's on the top here.
Is it on?
Welcome. Thanks for coming here. I'm Ron Schuster, and I'm somewhat responsible for this, so I wanted to make a couple announcements and tell you a little bit how this came about. First thing is I'm so happy to see so many people here, and I think you're in store for an unbelievable 2 days. Not that you have to be here for 2 days. It's structured so that you can pick and choose what you want to come to see. Please spread the word. We have registration, but we're happy to have walk-ins, and any friends, relatives, or anybody you think that would benefit from this is more than welcome. We want as many people to come as possible. So first, a couple thank yous. I want to thank Rabbi Schwartz, Rabbi Sorokin, the Bethel board, all the committee members. You know who you are. Basically, I had an idea, and it's a lot of people made this happen. I want to thank, obviously, Maya and Avi, who I've got to know a little bit better through this whole process, and they're just amazing people, and if you have not heard them before, you're in store for a real treat. They have just a wonderful way of presenting information and educating, which is what this is all about. I want to thank Jennifer Berman, who helped me with this. I have to give one side note. I do have the crying gene, so I'll try and get through this. Anyway, I have to embarrass my family. However, the power behind all of this that really made it happen is Amanda. Thank you. Appreciate it. So, like a lot of you, I became very affected by the events surrounding October 7th. And, what happened was just horrific, and there was something inside of me that became attached to that. And I imagine being there. I imagine what it must have been like for the people living through that. I imagine what it was like for the families. And I don't think you can really accurately, truly know what it was like unless you were there. But it opened my eyes to a lot of things. And I will say that I could not get enough information. I was just I was reading and listening and looking on my phone constantly. I definitely went down the rabbit hole. And just as an aside, I would recommend, if you get a chance, or I would recommend making it a point to to watch Screams Before Silence, because I think it's a really well done documentary that tells the truth and makes us all bear witness to really what happened there. So anyway, I was very much affected by all of that, and then trying to get more and more information, and then I was watching Israel's response, and then I was watching the response of the world, where somehow Israel became the aggressor and Hamas was the victim, and I just became more and more worked up about the whole thing. So coincidentally, I happened to hear Avi speak at a friend's home, and I think what you will find is that he is a wealth of information that is presented in such an unbelievable way that it made sense to me when he was speaking. So I said, oh, that sounds right. I'm trying to make some sense of all this. So I read his second book, and by the time I finished reading that book, I think I had a better understanding of what's going on over there, in that it's not an Israel problem. It's not an Israel issue. It's a Middle East issue. And the more I've taken to what I've learned from his book, and now I can hear some comments in the media, that until we understand the Middle East from the point of the people living there, which we are so, fortunate to have guests that are from the Middle East, until we understand it from their point of view, I don't think that we're going to come to any solutions imposing the West's culture onto the Middle East. So with that in mind, and the more I learned, and I'm sure they'll talk about the axis of resistance, and to me what is turning into more of an anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism propaganda communication, is the more I felt like, boy, I've been asleep at the wheel. I think that there's like a major shift, an inflection point that's happening, at least in the West. And that made me very, very concerned and made me want to do something. So in part, this is that do something. And layered on top of that was, what is that something going to be? And at that same party, another friend made a comment that stuck with me, and it resonated, that what is the connection, what is going to be the connection to being Jewish in Israel for the next generation? Okay, so for a lot of us, we have parents, grandparents that were in the Holocaust, and so we know second-hand, third-hand information that was real, that binds us together. But the question is, what happens with the next generations? And I'm very proud of my two sons and their wives, because we're not a particularly religious family, but I'm very proud of them. But it became clear to me that the information that we are receiving, our opinions are being very much influenced by the information that we get, whether it's on television, and more importantly for the younger generations, through social media. And it's how that information and what information is being disseminated that is forming this younger generation's opinions. And that struck me. So one of my strong goals with this was, how can we educate everybody, but so much importantly, the next generation, to some real facts, so that they feel empowered, they're educated and they're empowered, and they can stand up for themselves, and they can stand up for being Jewish, and stand up for the need to have Israel in existence. Because I think that there is a bit of an inflection point and an existential threat. And so with that in mind, I reached out to Avi and Maya and presented an idea that is going to be this weekend. So just welcome, and thanks for coming. And tell everybody you know, because if they're not here today, they can come a little bit tomorrow. It's going to be a great weekend, and I'm going to finish. So thanks for listening.
Ron, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, shalom, Shabbat shalom. Thank you for attending. We are very honored, we are very excited. I don't really know what to talk about, so it's like, this conference was supposed to be actually 2 weeks ago. And we had to postpone it because we find out that it was the first day of the Ravens game. And so accordingly, we have also to change a couple of other plans in the Middle East, so it will match with the conference. Very honored to be here today with you. Indeed, as Ron said, this is an educational mission to equip, empower, and educate people for a better understanding of a very complex region. This whole conference that started thanks to Ron's visionary leadership actually is part of our 1 year, 2 almost, myself and Maya. She runs the world in the free time. And our mission actually was born during the last lecture tour in the United States that was in February, March, when we realized how deep is the thirst for knowledge and understanding, a real knowledge and understanding, a contextualized and nuanced understanding. And so we made a spontaneous decision while we were on the road back then to launch this, I would say, ambitious initiative. We could not do that without the support of generous visionary leaders and supporters and donors of our board. Some of them are from Baltimore, as you probably know, and we are very grateful and appreciate for your support. We couldn't do it without you, so I want to thank you for your support and friendship and leadership. And, when we decided to do that, I turned to the board and I said, sometimes you could have a million reasons why not to do something, but sometimes all you need is one reason. And I think that to a large extent it's overlapping with Ron's what inspires Ron to lead this whole amazing initiative. So we are hoping through this mission, through this conference today and tomorrow, as well as the many other activities that we are planned to have in North America, and together with some amazing, outstanding people from the Middle East, at least 3 of them. Andrew, to the best of my knowledge, is not from the Middle East.
Not that I know of.
But you can come if you want. You can join the Middle East.
Long time.
Never a dull moment, promise you. And the whole idea is actually that we are bringing the voices from the region by people from the region, because those voices do not present in the discussion in the West. And therefore, there is an enormous need to understand the complexity of the region by people from the region who knows this region inside out. And so for me personally, being at the present of Dalia and Hussein and Hyvie and Andrew is a great honor, it's a great opportunity. I'm very much looking forward to today and tomorrow, and I can promise you that I think it will be enormously significant in terms of maybe, hopefully, little bit better understanding of this complex region that is called the Middle East. So we are now heading to this opening part where we are going to share with you our personal stories. Each one of us is going to tell his own personal stories. It will be about 5 minutes per speaker because we are very structured, trying to be structured. So I will take myself the liberty to start with myself. As you probably know, I'm married to Maya, which was a big change in my life. I was born and raised in Jerusalem. I'm actually an ancient Jerusalemite. My grandfather lived in the old city of Jerusalem in the 1800s, and he was a rabbi of the oldest Sephardic synagogue in the world, which is Yochanan ben Zakkai synagogue that was built in the early 1600s. So from this part of the family, I come with a yichus, as we say. Also for my mother's side, it's very interesting because it has to do a lot with the reason I'm here. My mother's father came from a place called Kirkuk, which is the northern part of Iraq. It's predominantly populated by Kurds, but there also used to be a Jewish community, a large Jewish community. And so my grandfather came to Israel as a young man. He was 17 or 18 years old, starting his life, and then he brought all his family, and he was fluent in Arabic, of course. He grew up in an Arab neighborhoods and environment. So to a large extent, he was in a way an Arab. Why do I tell you that? Because growing up in Jerusalem, all the time I heard him talking to my grandmother in Arabic when they didn't want us to understand something. You know that. And so, for example, he was kind of like saying something, and she was saying, Allah Karim. And I was kind of like thinking Hebrew. And I was saying, Allah Karim sounds to me like it's something on the pillows. And I was like, what the hell is on the pillows? What is this whole thing of the pillows? Later on, when I grew up, I learned that Allah Karim means God is the noblest one.
Generous, yeah.
The generous one. So this is something they learn. And growing up in Jerusalem, playing games, you know, back then in the 60s, the cell phone in Jerusalem were not so good. And playing out in the streets in Jerusalem in the 1960s was an amazing experience, as you could imagine. We basically spent the whole day out. And many of our games had strange names. For example, one game was we used to play with marble, whatever it's called. And one name of it was Subbe. We called it Subbe. I didn't know what Subbe means, but that was the name of the game, playing with the marbles. Later on, when I became fluent in Arabic, I understand Subbe is to point accurately at something, to be a sniper. So that was the source of this name. There was another game that we started the game and we said Friki. Friki, later on I learned, it comes from the Arabic word farik, which means teams, and it also means to divide. So this is how we started. And there was another game that was called Rakib, which we used to throw stones on the ground, and if I hit your stone, you have to carry me on your shoulder all the way to the next place. Rakib in Arabic means to ride a donkey. So these are a couple of examples. So I grew up, and obviously that was very natural for me to go to this whole interesting world of knowing my environment, obviously being fluent in Arabic as part of my positions, both in intelligence as in education. And the truth is that I wanted to deal with education when I was younger, but it took me almost 20 years to get there. And I'm very honored and very thankful for that. Before that, I had all these governmental agencies positions. Some of them were quite risky, sort of speaking, but I can tell you there is nothing more riskier than teaching Israeli teenagers. Don't do that. Don't do that. It was a great experience. The road took me later on to hold the position of the Fellow of Intelligence and Middle East Affairs at the Eisenhower Institute. Then we developed that to the Capitol Hill. And for the last couple of years, we have established ITME inside the Middle East, our nonprofit in the States. And actually, our mission is to provide a political, nonpartisan education about the Middle East as much as possible, because we believe that in the end of the day, that is the best way to really understand Israel's challenges and Israel's geostrategic horizons, because we are saying if you want to understand Israel, you have to understand professionally the Middle East. This is the guiding code of our work. And so we are very thankful and honored for the opportunity. Just to conclude my part, reminding you, it is today and tomorrow. We have an amazing sessions with outstanding people. I hope that you could attend those sessions, and we will be very honored. So at this point, I'm concluding my opening part, sticking to my 5 minutes. And now I'm turning to my friends, colleagues, and guests, and I would like to start with you, Dalia.
Thank you, Avi. First of all, I want to say a word about Avi and Maya. Many people don't know that. Don't?
You have to operate the.
Okay, you can hear me now. Yes, yeah. So, hello everyone. I'm very happy to be with you here today, and it's really an honor.
She is on.
My microphone is working. I don't know
It is.
why you cannot hear me.
Can you closer to your mouth?
Is it better?
Maybe because of the hijab, it's like.
There is an echo. Okay. What can I do about it? Go. That's better. Okay. Okay, if this is working, I will use this. Okay, go. Oh my God, okay. Okay, so first of all, thank you so much for having me here, Avi and Maya and Ron and all the team here. Amanda also, I cannot see her, but I know there were a lot of work done to bring us here and also maybe help us bring this message of hope to you, because since I came here to the United States, as I will tell you how it happened, which was quite an adventure, I have been surprised by how much the Jewish people feel so isolated and so threatened by what's going on. And I think the fact that we are here today is mainly meant to give a message of hope to everyone here in this room that you are not alone. And we are examples of people in the Middle East, and we are not only 4 or 3 or 5, but actually we are in thousands who believe that this fight that Israel is leading right now is not only Israel's fight, but it's also the fight of people like us who call themselves liberals or liberal Muslim like myself. So we still believe that this is a common war and we are going to fight it together. And actually, thank you. Actually, this was my position since day one of October 7. And this is unfortunately the reason why I was forced to leave my home country, Egypt, after being there my whole life. So my story did not start on October 7, but I will start from October 7. On October 7, I was like many other Egyptians and Arabs watching the news from Arab media, and they told us it was only a clash between Israeli soldiers and Hamas militants. Nobody told us about the raping of women, the attacks on the seniors, the burning of the houses, the kidnapping. And then, a few days later, this news was revealed to us in the Arab world. But guess what? The people did not sympathize with the victims. They celebrated. And this was so shocking to me that it was a reason to celebrate just because these people who have been brutalized on that day are Jewish. And at that moment, I felt somehow, especially that also I watched the videos collected by the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Israel from the cameras of camera phones. The camera on the phones of the terrorists and also at the kibbutzim. And I was so shocked by the horrific scenes I saw, and I was really angered that some people saw a reason to celebrate in this tragedy. And well, I decided to stand up for these victims, to tell my fellow Arabs and Muslims about the truth, about what happened. So I went directly to my social media platforms where I have a good following, and I started to tell the truth. This stirred a limited backlash against me, and I said, no, it doesn't matter, I will continue telling the truth. Then I was invited to speak in the media. And I spoke to several media outlets about the issue until I was eventually invited to comment on the retaliatory wars that Israel started later on against Hamas, to go and punish Hamas for what they did. And I appeared in this Arab media and I told the truth. I said, Israel is fighting a fair war. Israel has the right to defend itself against this terrorist organization. And if Arab countries are thinking straight, if Arab leaders are thinking straight, they should be backing Israel. So imagine saying this to an Arab audience in Arabic. Of course, this stirred, thank you so much. This stirred a terrible backlash against me. It started first by radical Islamists inside Egypt trying to kill me. A group of them issued a fatwa that I should be killed because my blood should be shed because I am not a good Muslim. A group of them even went to my mother's house looking for me to just make this fatwa happen. And then, but actually this is not the shocking part. The shocking part is when I contacted the security authorities in Egypt to tell them I need protection. And the answer I got was, no, we are not going to protect you. I said, is it because I condemned Hamas? They said, no, it is because you said you support Israel. So for them, it was acceptable, for the Egyptian security authorities, it was acceptable to let me being killed just because I said I support Israel. And it didn't stop here. The next morning, I woke up to the news that there are a number of legal claims filed against me by some lawyers who are close to the regime. Some of them accused me of things like inciting war crimes, threatening national security, and the funniest of all, spying for the Israeli Mossad. Of course, although these did not make any sense, but they put me in great danger, and I had to very quickly act and leave the country, and I did so with the help of great people who helped me not only get out of Egypt safely, but also to find a new life here and establish new life here. And I'm so proud to say that my dear friends Avi and Maya were among these people. So I'm so grateful for all what they have done to me. But I think there is a reason why I came here actually. Part of it has to do with the fact that the United States is already suffering from what's going on in the Middle East. Because if we think about the situation with an open eye, we will realize that it is actually a war on the West, a war on the US in the form of Israel, in the form, or on the chessboard of the Middle East, if we can say. So with this understanding, I think there is a reason why I came here. And I think this is mainly one, to give hope to the Jewish community and affirm this message that you are not alone, we are fighting this fight together. And number two, also to speak to young students who are somehow brainwashed by what's going on. So far, and actually Avi, we met also in a number of these activities. I've been visiting several campuses, speaking to students from both sides, the Jewish side, I mean the pro-Israel side, and the pro-Palestinian side. And I think it's very important to do that effort, because one day I was in the position of these students. When I was in my first year in university as a fresh woman, I mean, growing up in a quite conservative society that educated us that Israel is our enemy, the Jewish people are our ideological enemies as Muslims, it was natural for me at that time to join the protests on my campus against Israel. This was around the time of the Second Intifada. And I remember very well that I changed my mind one day. What really changed my mind, what gave me this eye-opening moment and helped me question everything and eventually learn the truth about Israel and the Jewish people and the Jewish culture, was the fact that I realized that the people who are leading these protests are the Muslim Brotherhood, when they don't believe neither in peace or better life for anyone other than themselves and their radical groups. This happened at one day, about 2 months in the protesting mess and chaos. It happened actually that the people organizing the protests decided to burn some flags. So they started by burning the Israeli flag, which made sense because the protest is against Israel anyway. And then they burned the American flag, which did not make any sense to me at that time because, well, how burning the flag of a country that exists tens of miles away will actually, tens of thousands of miles away, I mean, will liberate Al-Aqsa Mosque or make the lives of the people in Gaza better. But then they burned the third flag, and this third flag was my own flag, the Egyptian flag. And this was a very shocking moment for me. So somehow, by speaking to students on both sides here in American universities, I'm trying to give them this cognitive dissonance moment I have gone through myself, to help them question and question everything they are listening or hearing, and get out of the box, of the ideological box they have been stuck into for so long. So this is very briefly my story, and I'm determined to continue the fight, and I am sure we will eventually.
You know that we are applying here Middle East clock.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Maya bought a clock from Amazon. And she was very proud, and she said, it's in colors. And I was like, I'm colorblind. Yeah. Okay, this is better? Wow, okay. All right, thank
Shall we
you
grab
for
that
the note.
microphone?
No, I think just Hussein, now that it's your turn, you could hold your mic, and so I'm now handling the
Can
to
you hear me?
Hussein.
Okay. Well, thank you, Avi. Thank you, Maya. Thanks, everyone, for
No,
being
you
here.
have to hold it.
Hold it up.
Yeah.
Should I grab that one?
You
I
can,
think-
it may do what's it called?
This is better? Okay. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'll try to be brief. My name is Hussein, and I'm half Lebanese, half Iraqi. My mother is from Lebanon, and my father is from Iraq, Baghdad, and I spent time growing up in both countries. And when I was in elementary school, they used to take us in Iraq to the street to cheer for Saddam and pray that God will give him a long life. And then the war with Iran broke out, and my family had to move to Lebanon. And over there, everyone was supporting Khomeini, so now I was taken to the street and started praying that God take the life of Saddam. So it was everything but in reverse. But anyway, growing up in this conservative society, my mother is from the town of Baalbek, for those who know Lebanon, and this is where Hezbollah was being formed in the early 1980s. I came from a family, and I was fortunate that my family had the means to send me to American schools. I went to the American University of Beirut, and as I learned the English language. This gave me access to knowledge, and I started reading books, and I started liking these books, and I started thinking that life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, equality, these ideas made much more sense to me than whatever they were feeding us at the time. And this stayed with me for a while. In the year 2000, until 2000, Israel was still in South Lebanon. And Israel, of course, was the enemy to me and to everybody else. But then Israel pulled out. And I was probably there the second day after Israel. I was standing at the barbed wire fence. I could see actual Israelis. This was the first time I had seen an Israeli person. And I started thinking, okay, so I like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What do these people like? So I became really curious to know and understand. Now, mind you, if you live in Lebanon or most of the Arab countries, if you're from the people who understand other languages, then your access to knowledge would be either Noam Chomsky about Israel or Norm Finkelstein, or any combination of people who, you guys probably know who these people are. They're just bashing Israel all the time. And that's if you're lucky. If you don't know the languages, then the books that you'll get to read about the Jews and the Israeli people would be the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which says that Israel land is from the Nile to the Euphrates, you know, that fake document from Tsarist Russia. And the most common words of the anthem, of the Israeli national anthem. So they're translated into Arabic, and after the fourth line, they add a line in which the Jews are saying, we want to press a dagger into the hearts of every Muslim and every Muslim child. And by the way, this is not challenged. This is very common knowledge. If you go to Beirut or Damascus or Amman, this is common knowledge. I'm here to tell you that it's really hard for anyone who lives in the Arab countries to get knowledge about Israel and the Jews. And I became very curious, so I decided that I wanted to learn the Hebrew language to understand how these people think or what they say. And of course, it's really hard to learn Hebrew if you were living in Beirut at the time. I found one spot for those who know the Israeli media landscape. one spot on the Beirut coastline where I could park and get Reshet Alif and Reshet Bet on the AM. And I started listening, and then God created the internet, thankfully, and this gave me access to Haaretz, which has both English and Arabic, and Hebrew, excuse me. And then I started printing out and comparing the words and learning. Long story short, I wanted to practice, so I started driving to the border again, hanging out with Israeli soldiers on the other side, just trying to practice my basic, shalom, manishma, and of course, Hezbollah wouldn't let me. Hezbollah would pick a fight and they'd say, this is the enemy, we don't talk to the enemy. But anyway, this was my experience, and I felt that there was something wrong. And because I was from Iraq, when the US showed up to topple Saddam, I couldn't say no. My family had suffered immensely. And at that point was when I broke with the tribe, and I broke with friends. And I said, that's it. If you want to support tyranny, I'm out. And I moved to this country. And I joined almost every movement that I knew of that was supporting spreading of democracy. Now, I know it was not the best way that we did it, but we shouldn't give up. And if it didn't work in Iraq and Afghanistan, it doesn't mean that democracy is bad. It means that we didn't know how, as Arab, we didn't grasp the opportunity, and as Americans, we didn't know how to really connect with that part of the world. So in this country, thankfully, I got access to everything Hebrew. I started following on the debate. I understood that really the Israelis are not really going to kill every Arab or want to kill every Arab. I attended Yom HaZikaron, and over there, if you listen to the songs, you'd never know who these people were fighting when they die. And this gave me a lot of insight, and on and on. So I decided that what I know, I should tell others. And now, like Dalia said, the others are waking up. They're understanding that the world is getting smaller. Many Arabs are. We're probably the loudest right now of the Arabs, but we're not alone. And you guys are not alone. And this thing is happening, and of course you probably heard the news that Israel took out Nasrallah. And I'm from Lebanon. I've been thrilled for the past 24 hours. So this was a great event that's happened. Thank you.
Thank you, Hussein. Just a moment. Thank you, Hussein. Now you can hear me, right? Okay, good. Everybody's happy. And two comments about something that Hussein said about Hebrew. There is a lot of similarity between Hebrew and Arabic. There are many, many similar words, which is fascinating for itself. And one other thing, if you really try to know how Jews are thinking, don't. It's very complex, right? Hussein, thank you so much. Hevi.
Thank you so much, Avi and Maya, for inviting me today. It's a great honor to be with you all. My name is Hevi Buzo. I was born and raised in Damascus, Syria. I come from a very mixed family. My father is half Kurdish, my mom is half Turkish. My mom is from Aleppo, my father is from Damascus. For anybody who knows about this complexity in this part of the world, there's a lot of conflict there between all these different identities. So I grew up very in tune with having issues that are basically rooted in that division and conflict between people could happen even within one person. On top of that, my mom was born and raised in the Jewish quarter in Aleppo, even though her parents were both Muslim, from Muslim families. So I grew up being from a minority and listening to my mom's stories about the Jewish community in Aleppo, her own friends and neighbors, and the abuse that they suffered under the Ba'ath Party, an Arab nationalist socialist party that continued to rule Syria throughout my own life and until today. But what was really striking to me at that time growing up is that I would hear those stories about the Jewish community and how they would there was, horrible stories of rape, abuse, murder, and then the families will be escaping in the middle of the night, and I would never hear that anywhere else. Nobody else would talk about the Jewish people, about the Jewish people's history. And on top of that, in terms of Israel, when there's a suicide bombing by Hamas, murdering innocent people on a bus, people would be celebrating in the media, in the billboards, in schools. And my family is very unique in that sense. They're liberal. They've always said that they wanted peace with Israel, and they would be talking about how monstrous that was. But we were not the conventional family. My parents' friends were the artists, the directors, the actors, but even this segment of society didn't agree with my parents on these issues. So we were literally living like what we say at home is not something we would say outside of the house. And that's including being against the Assad regime and the ruling family in Syria, which is a very corrupt, bloody dictatorship. And growing up with that sense of just seeing things from a different perspective, I was on a journey. I believe that I was on a journey because as a teenager, I came to the United States. And one of the first jobs I had was working at the mall. And I met an Israeli girl who was working in a kiosk at the mall. And we became friends, and we started having lunches together. And I even opened the store for her one time because there was a sale going on that would end the next day. So I reopened it before the mall closes so she can get the sale that day. And before she went back to Israel, she actually got me all these products from the Dead Sea. So that was such for me, growing up in that part of the world and seeing things and how they are and just having my own personal experiences gave me the realization that these stories need to be told. There's the truth and there's the lies. And what we are seeing in Arab media is the lie. And I wanted to be a journalist. So I decided that I want to utilize my abilities. And of course, I've had my own journey because it wasn't like overnight I decided that this is what I want to be only talking about. But I did go back to Syria. I did the first English radio show. And on this radio show, I talked about Jerry Seinfeld. Jerry Seinfeld's mother is Jewish from Aleppo originally. And because I did that, I got fired. I actually got called by the owner of the radio station, and it was like, how could you? You're gonna get us shut down. I started getting phone calls from what people were saying that this is probably the intelligence services of the Assad regime, like, how dare you celebrate somebody who's Jewish? And I'm like, why can I not celebrate somebody who's Jewish? So that was really hard for me to understand, still because they're claiming that they're against Israel. They're actually against the Jewish people. And that's the core root of it. So later on, there was the uprising that happened in Syria. I came back to the United States. I was already an accomplished journalist. I became the bureau chief of a TV station here. But along the way, I realized that I wanted to utilize my voice and my abilities to bridge the gap, to connect and educate Arab-speaking people about Israel and about the Jewish people and about the Jewish people's history, and I want to promote peace, people-to-people peace. And then there was the watershed moment, which is the Abraham Accords, because all of a sudden, there were Arab countries that actually signed peace agreements with Israel, unlike the one with Egypt and Jordan. Now you are talking about people-to-people peace, and there were initiatives. You see young people getting together, collaboration that is happening. But still, it wasn't picked up by the media in the way that you would hope that it would be picked up. So I started my own initiatives. In the beginning, on my own social media, I did a live streaming show called Middle East Rise. And then I co-founded Yalla, which is what I'm doing right now. And it's both in Arabic and in English. And of course, it was in the beginning about soft content, inspirational, positive stories, the good news. And showing the humanity in everybody, because it's about humanization. There's been dehumanization in the Arabic language media, and I wanted to do the exact opposite. You would never see an Israeli actor on an Arabic language media. You would never see anything about Israel's culture, about the Jewish people's history. that you will never see. So it's basically breaking that barrier, which was still not actually happening in Arabic language media, unfortunately. However, there was a momentum that is still happening in terms of the Arabic-speaking public, which is in the exact opposite direction of what's happening in the West, which we will talk more about tomorrow. But of course, after October 7th, which was an absolute attempt of genocide against the Jewish people in Israel, we switched from being about the good news and the positive stories to actually doing educational work, because the Arabic language media was not only not showing what happened to the people who were impacted directly by this genocide, in my opinion, attempted genocide, but also they were either celebrating it or denying it, which was a major setback. And now there are, complexities in the Arab media as well, but it became even more important what we're doing at Yalla, and we've continued to do this, and I think there's so many developments that are happening that are very hopeful and very promising in the Arabic language speaking world that we'll talk more about tomorrow, but I think that there is hope, and that this will impact what's happening here, and even though unfortunately here there's a relapse, there is this opposite momentum that will, we're in a shrinking world, so it will all connect, and I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Avi, thank you so much. We are now moving to Andrew. Andrew is from another Middle Eastern state called United States.
I live in several states in the United States, but not a
Andrew,
Middle Easterner. And the notion of why am I going to be on this panel has crossed my mind several times, because I am not a Middle Easterner. I am not a proclaimed expert on the conflict. I'm a grandson of Holocaust survivors. And I've spent my career in media and marketing, and have really just come to the conclusion that disinformation is the current war. There is state-sponsored, state-backed propaganda that's infiltrating all of our social media feeds, and we unintentionally, many of us, many well-intentioned of us, are sharing fake news, bad information that's not correct, that is designed to divide us, and not realizing that a lot of the actual content we're reading and the people that we're engaging with online are literally either fake robots or, as they call them, troll armies. For me, it's interesting. Even though my last name is Schuster, I'm not actually related to Dr. Ron Schuster, but it's great to finally meet you. And my wife, Cantor Blatt, is one of the cantors here, so I love this community. Yeah, she is the best. So it's been an incredible experience to be invited into this panel. I'm here as more as a participant and an audience member, frankly, than what I'm going to claim to be an expert in the Middle East conflict. I'm here to talk about the difference between disinformation and misinformation, and just sharing practical ideas and just data, and just helping all of us understand what's actually happening in terms of, I think as Havi really pointed out, this shift in the world where we're seeing just an absolute decline in our civil discourse in this country, and even within our own community. Look, I mean, for me, I went to, I've lived in Vermont, West Virginia, Maryland, and Texas, and to understand the anti-Semitism that I experienced just through that perspective, knowing all along that a lot of the issues were driven by state-sponsored actors, Iran, for example. So, it's been a very difficult thing, I think, to explain to people the complexities for a long time of how this disinformation and how these terrorist organizations are actually driven by external forces, and that, frankly, we've been taking the bait for a long time. And in my generation, I'm 38 years old. A lot of my peers, a lot of my Jewish peers, well-intentioned folks have been trained to become anti-Zionists and believe that they are part of an issue that, in reality, is so much more complex, is so much deeper than just blaming one side or the other. So my role here is to really just provide some data and some basis and some case studies in terms of how dangerous disinformation is and what we as the public can do to help spread the stop of misinformation. So it's truly a privilege to be a part of this, and just excited to watch this weekend unfold.
So that has been the first round of the kind of like personal journey in a very short digest. And now we would like to move to the part where I'm having a discussion with my guests and colleagues. And we are going to have each interview is going to be 10 minutes. Watch the clock. 5, sorry, 5. Maya is making sign. And so I would like to start, Hussein, with you. When we talked about this discussion, you bring something very interesting about the way Arab Americans and Muslim Americans are being represented in the discussion in the West, in the States particularly. So please share with us your thoughts.
Yeah, of course. One of the issues that we have in this country, and especially those of us who are raising kids, is that we grew up over there in the Middle East, and then our kids grew up over here. Now, my kids are fluent in Arabic, not only the language, but also the music and the food, and they visit all the time, and that's part that I'm proud of. Yeah. But I wouldn't let my kids to identify themselves as Arab American, because Arab American at this point, it's a militant identity that asks for perks, that says, okay, we're Arab American, therefore we need this special treatment. So this issue, unfortunately, is being hidden behind the identity politics war that's going on in this country. And this gives the wrong impression to Americans about what the Arabs are. It gives a wrong impression to Arab Americans themselves. And this is one of the interesting points, because many of the Arab Americans I speak to, or many of the ones that you hear, whatever they're saying, it does not reflect the debate over there. And this is interesting because you would see Arab Americans over here who are crying over Nasrallah, when you can see thousands and tens of thousands of Syrians and Lebanese who are celebrating the killing of Nasrallah. So what I'm trying to say here is that we have a mismatch between these people who go to protest on the campuses of Columbia and Harvard and what people like us are saying. So they're cheering for Nasrallah. I grew up suffering the tyranny of Nasrallah. Since 2019, I haven't been able to set foot in Beirut because they're harassing me and after me and for security reasons and threats. And yet, these guys are cheering for him, and I can't. I can't say he's a bad guy. And this experience is, unfortunately, their side, their point of view is the one that's being picked up by the media. As someone who works for a think tank, and I go on TV shows all the time, and I get attacked by Americans who are not from the Middle East, you know, who are supporting Nasrallah, and who are, ironically, who are against imperialism. And, you know, and I'm thinking, you are being imperial on me. You are imposing your opinion on someone who grew up in that part. I know how that part of the world looks like, and you don't. So what I'm trying to say here is that the identity politics war in this country has made things worse. Instead of having Arab Americans and Jewish Americans being the bridge and then replicating our good ties and projecting them over there, we're doing the opposite. The people over there want more peace than the people over here. So this is horrible, and I know that it's being used for politics all the time. You guys probably are aware of the cartoon that was drawn about Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib in the Detroit News. Are you guys familiar with that? She was drawn as someone who was sitting at her desk with her name on it, and next to it there was a blown up pager. And this was a hint that she was a member of Hezbollah after Israel had blown up all these pagers, or all these Hezbollah pagers. And the response from many of her other Congress people, the response was that this is Islamophobia, that you guys are going after her, and this is part of racism. And many people like us stood up and said, no, we're sorry. We agree that she's Hezbollah, we disagree with what she says, and don't take us as offended and speak on our behalf. And this is my bottom line here. The Arab Americans and Jewish Americans, every American, and Arabs themselves, they come in all sizes and shapes. They're not a monolithic block. They have diverse opinions. Not all of them think, Jerusalem is the top of the world for Islam, or whatever fiction they want to come up with. So this is really hurtful, and I'm trying to raise kids in this country to be proud of being Arab, and at the same time not to be Arab American. And I'm sure you guys are probably facing similar issues here, like we are. So we try to push, Yalla tries to push, we try to use our social media presence and our voices, but it's not always going the way we want it, even though we keep on trying.
Thank you, Hussein. You're actually kind of like segueing to my next interview with Ivy, because you mentioned Yalla. So we would really like to learn about Yalla, even though it will be for 5 minutes.
Yalla. Tell us about Yalla.
So yeah, absolutely. And actually, like in terms of Yalla, when it was founded, it was in a time of a lot of hope, because there's already a shift that is happening in the Arabic language speaking world, on social media specifically, where you see a rise of more people who are saying, we want peace with Israel. Our common enemy with Israel is the Iranian regime. Of course, it was more scary for people who are in different countries where the Iranian regime has influence, where they could actually be physically harmed for saying these things. But after the Abraham Accords, you would see people in Arab countries are saying this because now they have some sort of umbrella. And they are really meaning that, Israel is a very advanced country. It has so many advanced technologies and abilities that if Arab countries and Israel collaborate, we will have an entirely new, prosperous, stable Middle East. And younger generations are starting to see this. And Yalla, basically, we focus on younger generations. So there was a momentum. You would see more and more people, engagement, viewership, and everything. After October 7th, there was definitely a major setback because of the traditional Arabic language media went back to its old, same narrative, where they literally do not treat Israel and the Jewish people as humans. That's just in the bottom line. And there's that sense of some people found it to be a victory to do this, and others would basically just deny it, say no, Hamas didn't do this. And less people were basically coming out to say their opinions at this point. They were scared because of this massive wave of, we heard Dalia and Hussein, they're talking about the power of propaganda. People have been brainwashed and indoctrinated for decades. So when you have a change that's happening slowly and people are coming out, but then there is this silent majority that people are not basically sure in which direction they're heading. There are those very loud voices, very organized Islamists, Iranian regime-backed elements that are on social media, that are physically in the streets, and then people start getting intimidated again, and they become more quiet. Now, with Yalla, what's really important for us is to share the human story and to tell the stories that are not being told. So after October 7th, we started to tell these stories. We've interviewed Israelis who are Jewish and Arab, people who were at the Nova music festivals, family members of people who were murdered by Hamas. We interviewed Palestinians to talk about a Palestinian perspective that is also silenced in Arabic language media. You would not hear a Palestinian that would be saying, I want peace with Israel, I am against Hamas. Hamas abuses Palestinian on Arabic language media, which is, even in Abraham Accords countries, the movement, it didn't happen in the way it should be happening because there is a momentum, because people are ready. So that's what we did. And a lot of people, even though some of them will be afraid of commenting at this point, they will send us messages. I didn't know this story. Thank you for sharing this. They will even be surprised. Oh, we didn't know that the Arabs in Israel are thriving. We didn't know that Arabs in Israel are Muslims and the mosques are basically taken care of, which is what I saw personally when I visited Israel. And the church is the same way. So these are a lot of the grievances that people deal with in different neighboring countries of Israel, where minorities are oppressed, where the Christian minority is actually not able to build the churches, right? And then they hear that in Israel, and they see Christians are actually able to not only have their own communities giving these rights, but also their churches are being built, that they're getting support from the government. The same with Muslims. So a lot of untold facts that were shared and shown on Yalla. I've had multiple interviews with the families of the hostages. So these are the stories you wouldn't see. And I think what happened is that even though right after October 7th we saw a setback, there is a momentum that is happening all over again. And of course, in terms of Israel's response, when we talk about what Israel did, for example, to Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas, when he was in Iran, this is more, kind of evidence to the people in the region, Arab countries. Look, the head of Hamas is actually in the Iranian regime, which is really hated. The Iranian regime is exposed for what it is. While the other elements, they still hide behind the Palestinians, even though they're the ones who are abusing the Palestinians. And they treat them like pawns, like human shields. But these are the things that people are now realizing, and there is this momentum that is happening in Arabic language, which is in the opposite direction from English. And I think that is where, I see here what's happening. And even though I actually believe this is the fringes, even those you see those loud voices on social media, and you see the protests in universities, we'll talk about this more tomorrow, but these do not represent, in my opinion, the majority of the American people. But they're loud, and they're being actually funded by foreign entities, enemies of our country, of the United States, who are funding this. So, but the exact opposite is happening in Arab countries, in the Arabic language world, and I think that's what people here need to know more about, because you cannot argue with somebody who was born and raised in the region about what's actually happening in the region, right? Like when you have college students here who are completely misled and completely indoctrinated, and they don't know, they're trying to do the right thing, that's what they think, but they're actually being used. And that's why this conversation is so important. I really want to thank you, Avi, for making this happen.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And as we are turning to Andrew, segueing to that, I would say something that you, Heavy, said. You talked about being misled, or, all those challenges. And in fact, to a large extent, I think, Andrew, this is one of the major challenges that you are dealing with, the whole issue of the need for critical thinking, and how do you address that in our time?
No, it's an incredibly dangerous time. The FBI just came out yesterday with the hate crime data over the last year and showing over the last 5 years prior, and the spikes in anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S. has just jumped dramatically, as we all know. And going back and referencing that, the same thing happened to the Asian American community around COVID. My thesis is that this is driven by the spread of misinformation and false narratives. We have to build a bridge. There's a lack of empathy between what seems like a very polarized and very divisive United States. If you look online, if you watch the news, you think the world is on fire, when in reality, even despite challenges and severe challenges in all parts of the world, most notably the Middle East, things are improving. I mean, access to the internet is such a relatively new thing. And when you look at the growing access to information in the Middle Eastern region and North Africa as well, like that is so promising to see that people are finally getting access to information they never had. And we are so ignorant in this country to this notion that everybody should think what we think or do what we do. And I think that's part of the evolution of social media and our role in understanding where we fit in it. We have a responsibility to fact check information. We have a responsibility to verify information. And it's not as simple as just sharing something from major news sources, because the Gaza Health Ministry is not, it's just not a source to get data about anything. For a period of time, the entire US media was perpetuating this, NPR, CNN down the line, this narrative that this was trustworthy data and single-handedly showing that Israel is the only reason that there is an issue in the region. These are things that are not obvious to many people. And when you see something on social media, you might think, oh wow, this looks real, it's shared from somebody I know. But with the ability of people to manipulate the algorithms, frankly, on social media, a great example, Notre Dame did a study on the efficacy of ISIS when ISIS was recruiting people internationally and had this incredible surge of people coming to join their cause. They had an army of young people, presumably actually in a warehouse in Syria, 300 people who were creating content to try to attract people, and then they were coordinated liking and sharing and literally hack the algorithm. So a lot of the changes in the data privacy and the regulatory elements we're seeing are in response to that. Cambridge Analytica, if anybody's familiar with that scandal, our data is very vulnerable right now, and there's ways to protect ourselves with basic things on social media. I think people are a little too invested in general, at least from the American perspective. And I'll even go a step further to say the moderate American Jewish perspective of protecting narrative. We can't control other people, and we can't control what they say, but we can control our actions. And I think when we as a collective society really start holding the information we receive accountable and share less, talk more, engage more, come to events like this, that's where I think the media bias can actually shift, because it will have implications, in my view, for the next generation. So critical thinking is essential, fact-checking is essential. There's a lot of great resources, some of which are shared in the booklet in terms of where you can find information about this, but we've got a real problem in this country because things are not as bad as they seem, but if we go by what we see online and perpetuate these inflammatory, often fake narratives, it's just going to make things worse. Not as much, I think, for everyone else, but for ourselves. And I think that's the goal of some of these foreign actors in trying to divide folks. So.
Andrew, thank you for your perspectives. And in fact, we are now reaching to the next round of our discussion. This is the round before the Q&A. And again, I will shortly interview my guests, each one. I'm sorry? I did? I owe you.
He's in a hurry.
Look, I told Maya when I met her that I used to have a black hair. Now it's white, and it's not only pigments. It's not only pigments, it's also other things. Dalia, I do apologize. So, yeah, I want to ask you about a very significant player in the region, Egypt. Egypt and its role in this whole thing that we see today. 5 minutes.
Sure. I will make sure not to pass 5 minutes. So So yeah, Egypt is very problematic and very complicated inside as well. And I'm sure many people are looking at Egypt now and wondering why it is behaving the way it is behaving. Egypt is a country that has a peace treaty with Israel, and it was a big deal when it was signed. It was the first peace treaty that Israel signs with any Arab country. And despite that, and until today, and despite the warming of the relationships between Egypt and Israel in the past, let's say, 10 years or so, despite all of that, Egypt is still messing up when it comes to its policies towards Israel. Unfortunately, I'm ashamed to say that this, as an Egyptian myself, the role of Egypt has dramatically diminished after the Arab Spring. And it's not the big sister of the region anymore. It's not the one who dictates culturally or socially or politically for the region what to do anymore. Since the Arab Spring, as I was just arguing with my friend Hevi on our way here, actually before the Arab Spring there were two main capitals, Damascus and Cairo. Syria and Egypt were the main pillars of the Middle East, or main pillars of the Arab world, if you can say. And Arab states were following everything these two capitals are saying in every way, until the Arab Spring happened and these two states, two big sisters of the region, somehow collapsed from inside. We can see this clearly in the case of Syria, but in the case of Egypt, although it's not very well seen, but actually Egypt is suffering a lot inside, suffering economically and also suffering politically, either since the fight between the Islamists on one hand, the Muslim Brotherhood, and the military started in 2013, or even after that when the military took over and started to control everything, dictate everything in the country. So with this all mess going on, the Gulf countries found an opportunity for themselves to take the lead of the region. And actually some Gulf scholars call it the Gulf moment. This eventually, over the years, led to declining the role of Egypt as the leader of the region and dictated new roles for the region. However, despite all of that, Egypt has always remained a key player in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Egypt remained a key player because of its relationship with Israel on one hand, and also its leverage over Hamas on the other hand. And this leverage over Hamas comes from the historical relationship between Egypt and Gaza. Maybe some of you know already that Gaza was at one time in recent history part of Egypt. And it was separated after the 1967 war, and even after the peace treaty was signed, when Sadat was offered to take Gaza back, he refused. He said, no, we don't want problems, we have seen enough. So with keeping all this in mind, Egypt also looks at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as its license to get more approval from the United States. It's because of Egypt's role in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. For example, you'll find the United States, several administrations, whether Republican or Democrat, very careful to keep sending funds to Egypt in the form of the US military aid. And it's because of Egypt's role in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you'll find phone calls coming back and forth between Egyptian leaders, the Egyptian president, and the US administrations, whether Republican or Democrat. We saw a change in this, a slight change in this with the current crisis on October 7. When October 7 happened, Egypt took all the wrong decisions, starting from condemning Israel for October 7, saying that October 7 happened as a result of the occupation, echoing exactly the same narrative of the Islamists. Number two, actually, Egypt showed support to Hamas and to the Palestinians in a very shocking way and very unexpected way, especially if you know that Hamas after the Arab Spring, in the aftermath of the Arab Spring, infiltrated into Sinai and formed terrorist organizations that killed our soldiers and our people. And it is Israel who helped Egypt get rid of Hamas terrorists in Sinai. So you would think that it would be natural for Egypt to pay the favor back for Israel, especially that Israel is now fighting against exactly the same enemy. But once again, because Egypt was very weak internally, the Egyptian leadership, the president, and the military, which is now ruling the country, they found it very difficult to challenge the mainstream. And the mainstream, of course, is sympathizing with the Palestinian people, not with Hamas. However, they went very far to once again speak about Hamas as a resistance group, freedom fighters. And the same media people in Egypt who a few years ago were describing Hamas as a terrorist organization, all of a sudden went on describing Hamas as a resistance group and wearing, the Palestinian kufiya on air and all this stuff, returned it back again after it was despised. So Egypt's failure internally, the internal failure of the rulers of Egypt led to this situation. They were unable to challenge the mainstream and went on making all the wrong decisions about the current episode of war between Israel and Hamas. And unfortunately, now Egypt is somehow paying the price for it economically because of the halt of the gas cooperation between Egypt and Israel in the Eastern Mediterranean, and also politically because people right now are falling under the influence of the radical Islamists who are once again empowered by this missed policies that Egypt adopted at this time. However, to end my words, if this will give you any kind of hope, it seems like the Egyptian leadership eventually started to realize that they committed a mistake. Recently, they changed the government and they brought in a new Minister of Foreign Affairs. And this Minister of Foreign Affairs, when he was an assistant minister, he was actually one of the biggest fighters against Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. So I think this is the first step that Egypt is taking to tell the world, okay, we committed a mistake and now we are ready to correct this. And I think also all the negotiations that are happening right now around the Philadelphia corridor and Egypt somehow feeling embarrassed by the fact that tunnels were discovered under Sinai are also somehow contributing to this need inside the Egyptian leadership to change its position towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Thank you.
Dalia, thank you so much. It's now exactly 2:35. The part of the Q&A starts at 3:15, which is about exactly 40 minutes from now, which means that you now, for our panel discussion, each and every one of our speakers has 10 minutes. And I would like to start with Andrew. How do you deal in understanding complex reality in the age of misinformation, disinformation, AI?
Sorry, it's still a little hard to hear. If you can just ask the first part of the question. I did hear the last.
How do you how do you decode complex reality in the age of misinformation, disinformation, AI?
Solutions for it.
Yeah, we have 10 minutes to solve this problem.
This is a big one, but look, AI is not new. It's new to us, but it's the idea of just programming and automating processes. There's more advanced AI, obviously, that can generate deep fakes, right? I mean, there was an example, I think it was, I think Pikesville Middle School. I saw it in the news, somebody recorded, was it Pikesville? They fake recorded somebody admitting to something that wasn't even them. And this person lost their job, and I think he got worked out. But I mean, at a very basic level, it's more about the generative AI, and what I mean by generative AI is artificial intelligence that can actually build content itself based on any set of pre-programmed inputs. So there are things that are already being done to stop the scalability of media manipulation. Things like the GDPR, and there's even been regulations in throughout many states, let alone in the entire throughout the entire country, to regulate artificial intelligence, regulate data privacy and protections. I come from an advertising background. We used to be able to target people based on very specific things, household income, things that made it very, even political slants. I used to work at the Baltimore Sun. We were able to target people based on that. With the change in the way that the regulations need to be to protect our collective data, the targeting of people, it's not as clear as it might seem, but it's basically built upon psychological profiles. So what people can do, and what Cambridge Analytica was successful doing in the 2016 election and onward, is using people's psychological profiles with an ocean test, a personality test, to really understand people's fears, weaknesses, anxieties, pair that with their conversations in any topics on Twitter, which is probably the most widespread of these platforms. But you can use people's social data and you can create content that is going to get them to react. And that is really the problem. So it's not necessarily a regulatory solution. I don't necessarily think propaganda is very old, right? I mean, this is not new. And the US has been part of waging disinformation campaigns throughout the Cold War and onward. So the tactic of it isn't new, but because of the scale of the internet, all of us having literally a computer in our hands at all times, we have to just take a different approach. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be on social media. I run a social media marketing company. That would not be in my best interest to say, but frankly, I think it's a really important time for us all to just take a step back. It's very easy to get caught up and wrapped up in the emotional elements of some of these debates and discussions, particularly post-October 7th, and knowing the real-world implications. But there are actual fact-checking and content source-checking tools that we've shared as a resource, but you can copy a link, download an image, run it through an actual system. There's a bunch of websites that will do this, and they'll tell you if it's fake or not. They'll tell you if it was generated by AI or if it was generated by a person. So AI and bots are not going anywhere. They're incredibly powerful in terms of, building content at scale. The ability for people to manipulate and prey on our weaknesses and the things that divide us and further perpetuate this tribal society that many people would like to think we live in America. It's just not real. I just drove through the entire country with my brother cross country. He tends to be a little bit more on the conspiracy theory side of things, and I tend to have this conversation with him, but he says, the country's a mess. There's all this civil strife. We're on the verge of civil war. I mean, we met a lot of very nice people, and pretty much we had no issues. I mean, there's no civil unrest that I can see. There are moments of it, but it cannot be measured by what's happening on social media. It has to be measured by our actual involvement in our local communities and in having a cross-discipline approach to understanding what's happening in the world. And many of us, fortunately, are educated in this room and have had the opportunity to have that basis in their thinking, but it's a societal issue, and we have the capability to protect the hearts and minds of our children, at least in the Jewish community and the Jewish American community, by opening up a dialogue to share positive stories from the Middle East, to highlight the fact that there isn't this hatred among most people. And the stuff we see, particularly this generative AI, fake content, state-sponsored disinformation, it's designed to make us think things are worse than they are, but people want peace, and I think that's what we have to really take seriously in terms of our engagement online.
Andrew, thank you so much. Actually, almost naturally, you are talking about social media and the impact and so on. It leads us to Avi, almost naturally. And Avi, I would like to ask you about, with this whole, this huge turbulence that you see in the Middle East, this major storm, sort of speaking. What do you identify in the discussion in the Arab media? What are the trends? What are the voices? What are the similarities and differences? What do you think it stands for? And by the way, I would add also that our distinguished guests are very welcome to make their comments as well vis-a-vis that issue if they want to make comments. I said that our distinguished guests are very welcome to make comments based upon or to refer to what other colleagues are saying.
Thank you, Avi. So this is like a very interesting time in terms of what's happening on social media. If I only can describe what's happening, because it's like there's a major contrast between what's happening in the Arabic language social media, because I basically decided, which is a lot of people don't, they post in English and they focus on English-speaking audience, which is important. But in my opinion, it's focusing on the Arabic-speaking audience is very important, because that's the core of the issue, and it's actually connecting to us here too. And that's the core of where a lot of anti-Semitism, anti-Israel rhetoric has been indoctrinated for so long. But what's really interesting is that right now, you see somebody like Piers Morgan, for example, when Israel targets the commanders of Hezbollah in a very precise operation, journalists and public personalities in the West literally say a statement that has nothing to do with the reality, like, why is Israel targeting Lebanon, for example? While what's happening in the Arabic language is the exact opposite. People are right now outspokenly celebrating Israel's strikes and security operations against Hezbollah in a way that never happened before. And in 2006, Israel had another war with Hezbollah. At that time, it was 180 degrees in terms of people's massive support for Hezbollah. They had the pictures of Hassan Nasrallah in people's homes, and on taxis, in private cars. Right now, people were celebrating in the streets in Syria, in Lebanon, in Tel Aviv. But you see a change that is happening where literally there's this agreement, this consensus among Arab countries, and that was the feeling of a lot in the Gulf, in Saudi Arabia, for example. People are appraising Israelis' leadership, and I'll share more about that tomorrow in the slide. But there are songs appraising Benjamin Netanyahu. They call him Abu Yair, the father of Yair, and literally there are posts celebrating his leadership, him as a person. You would never imagine this in English, that this is what's happening in the Arabic language on social media. So there is a massive why, and I want to explain to you why. People in these countries have suffered firsthand from these types of terrorist organizations like Hamas, like Hezbollah, like the Houthis. They were the ones to be murdered and basically abused first, and nobody talks about that. You know, what's really striking is that you see people in the West who were privileged to be born and raised in a democracy, in a country where there's human rights respect, where there's a rule of law, who have no idea what it is like to live under this type of oppressive, corrupt, dictatorial, with complete lack of value for human rights, human life. And then, they want to preach to the world about what's going on in the Middle East, and they will be shocked to see that what people are feeling in that part of the world based on their true experiences is the exact opposite of the trend that's happening in the West. So right now, if you see social media in Arabic language, you're just going to see a lot of agreement with Israel, celebration of Israel's actions against the terrorist organizations, by the way, including what happened against Haniyeh, the head of Hamas. So there is a momentum and a shift that I believe is the beginning of a new Middle East. And it's sometimes hard to see it when you're caught up in one development with one issue that happened now, but I'm seeing the transition that's happening over time, and it couldn't be more clear, specifically if you realize the difference between how things were and how things are today. So I think that there's just a lot for audience here in the United States, for the American public, for the public in the West in general, to literally catch up on and see and understand in terms of what's actually happening in Arab countries. And this new page that is being flipped about the realization of an alliance and a shared future between Israel and its Arab neighbors. I wanna leave it at that.
David, thank you for that. I'm actually, again, you are making my life very easy because naturally I can now go to Hussein. And you, Heavy, you talked about the gap between the way things at the Middle East viewed in the West and the way they are being viewed by people from the Middle East. And as we said, we will elaborate more on that tomorrow as well. And at this point, I want to turn to you, Hussein, and ask you the following question. What is the explanation in your mind for this gap? What is the reason for that?
Well, that's a great question, Avi. Let me first try to explain it by trying to define Israel, if I may. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Israel is the Jewish state where Jews practice sovereignty after centuries, maybe millennia, of being oppressed, whether in Russia or after the Holocaust in Europe or even under Islamic rule. The Jews said, that's it, we need to have our destiny in our own hands. That's the organizing principle of the Jewish state. And this is great, but there's more. No one would go live in Israel if your property was not safe, if your own self was not safe, if there was no rule of law, if someone is trying to oppress you, if you can't feed your children, raise your family. All of these issues are also important in addition to sovereignty. Now, here's the thing, in Arab countries, nothing of the sovereignty issues were missing or under threat. So Lebanon became sovereign, independent in 1943. Look at it now. There's no state, there's no electricity. Your property can be taken away from you any minute. You can't raise your children. No work, nothing, technically nothing. So people finally are coming to realize that, okay, beating imperialism is great, beating Israel like we did in 2006 presumably was amazing, but then what? What do you feed your children? I mean, you need a certain standard of living. You need to be able to trust the system, to trust schools. And this is what has pushed the countries, the UAE and Bahrain, to peace with Israel. Make no mistake, they didn't come to this peace because they wanted to be nice or to look, or for anyone to praise them. What you see in the Gulf is that the Gulf has been prosperous for a long time, relying on oil income. And now these rulers are thinking, okay, the population is outpacing and outgrowing the oil income. So what do we do to keep our lives going in certain directions? So they came to the conclusion, we need to trade, we need to have bilateral relations with as much countries as we can. And this is why you see the UAE. I mean, in addition to bilateral trade that has been growing exponentially with Israel, I visit Dubai often. You see Israelis all the time. This is tourism. This is money that's going to the Emiratis. And mind you, in Dubai, it's not only Emiratis. The UAE is 9 to 10 million people, the population. Only 2 million of them are locals. 8 million come from all over the place. So hundreds of thousands of Lebanese and Syrians and Iraqis, people who'd never see an Israeli in their dream, are now just sitting at a restaurant with Israelis next to them. So the UAE is now offering the alternative to all the nonsense about national pride and national sovereignty, and And the Lebanese are thinking, okay, we've had sovereignty for so many years, but we can't really live in this country. So this is what's changing, and this is what Havy's been talking about. The Lebanese and the Syrians and the Egyptians, they're going to Dubai and they're coming here and they're going to Europe and they're thinking, okay, these countries are countries, ours are not. And what do you do with, even if you get land back from Israel, even if Israel concedes Gaza or concedes Ramallah, or Israel already conceded South Lebanon and the Lebanese didn't make anything out of it. So this is the issue, and this is the fault line that divides many of us on the liberal side in the Arab world versus the Islamists. And the Islamists are against all of this for one reason, and by the way, if you stop listening to Khamenei and Nasrallah and Sinwar about beating the Jews and beating America, there's a much more important speech and rhetoric that they have on their days off. And this is, they often say that they need to counter Western civilization. And they say civilization, and this to them, this means that no universal declaration of human rights, no liberty, no freedom, and then the bottom line, of course, you can't apply democracy to me, therefore you can't change me. I'm Nasrallah, I'll be your leader for 40 years until Israel takes me out, of course. So this is the model that they're opposing. This is the model, and this is the model that people like us are saying, no, we have to join the modern times. And this is the fault line that the Islamists are not willing to concede. And now the point is, they use muscles, and many of us are not as equipped as they are. And this is why you see all these Arabs celebrating, cheering for Israel. So this is the change that's ongoing. Now, unfortunately, for things to change, we need some support from, this country became independent because we solicited help from the Dutch and the French against the British. This happens across human civilization. People in the Middle East, for things to change, the people who are driving change also need support from like-minded friends worldwide. The huge issue, the huge problem that we have here in the US, and I've been in Washington and working in this slum for 20 years now, is inconsistency. We have policies that support a few things and policies that are the exact opposite every day of the year, regardless of who's in power, Trump or Biden or the other guy. And this really makes people, we were just talking about this, if you guys know who the Druze are in Israel. There are Druze in Israel, there are Druze in Lebanon. My wife is Druze, I'm not. So the Druze, they're a community that's really big on preserving their own culture and their own tradition. And they're fine to, they go along with anyone who's in government. If you're Israel, fine, just leave our villages alone, our lifestyle alone, and we'll fight in your army and we'll pledge allegiance to you. And they do the same in Lebanon. Now, in Lebanon, the Druze are not going against Hezbollah or against anybody else because they're scared that if they do, no one will come to their rescue or support. They did this once. We were just saying in 2005, 6, and 7, when Bush was spreading democracy and the Druze jumped on board and they said, okay, we're coming. And then 2 years after that, America changed its mind. We advised them to compromise with Hezbollah. And all what you hear in the news, de-escalation, loving one another, all of this is nonsense to people who live over there. And this is, by the way, the most recent one that I heard from the Biden administration. When things were heating up between Israel and Hezbollah, the Biden administration said, yes, we understand, we talked to the Israelis, and they are escalating in order to de-escalate. So it's escalation for de-escalation. And I said, it means war for deterrence, but okay, if you like de-escalation, escalation, that's fine. So we have an issue in foreign policy. Foreign policy in this country is not foreign anymore. It's catering to domestic divisions all the time, trying to make these kids on college happy and the other kids in the other college happy. And this is driving everyone away from the US. Now, the US is not a player anymore, and thankfully, Israel is stepping up. Because someone must step up. It'll be either Iran or Israel. Everyone understands this, you know. We're Team Israel. There are other Arabs who are Team Iran, and that's the war you're seeing.
Hussein, you mentioned a couple of things that I think very characteristic of the Middle East. For example, slogans and rhetoric. You know, lots of slogans and rhetorics and all those things. And I would like to take this segment to segue to you, Dalia, and ask you about a major politician in the Middle East, a very significant state in the Middle East. And I think that this major politician is, you know, I'm saying like he makes Machiavelli looks like a chorus boy. I'm talking about Erdogan and Turkey. Talk to us a little bit about Erdogan and Turkey.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, Erdogan and Turkey. So I'm this man, but before actually speaking about Erdogan, because he's too complicated, let me highlight something from today's headlines that's very interesting and is related to how Turkey and Egypt are right now coming together on the expense of Israel, actually. Today, in reaction to the assassination of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, of course, several countries in the region and outside the region made statements to condemn Israel. The only two countries, which is natural, you know, I mean, the only two countries that in their statements did not mention Nasrallah by name and just condemned Israel for attacking Lebanon, just generally, are Turkey and Egypt, which is very, very interesting when you look at the language also of the statements. It seems that these two countries, I can understand. In the case of Egypt, it's mainly because Egypt don't care much about what's happening on the other side of the Red Sea. We care more about Hamas, about Gaza, about all the troubles that are happening perhaps in Sudan, in Libya, the divisions in Libya. But to cross the Red Sea on the other side, it's perhaps a concern more of Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and other countries. And for Egypt, all the time, it somehow remained neutral, for example, towards Iran and its proxies, except when Houthis, for example, in the Red Sea, make actions that are that could hurt Egypt's economy or so. The same thing applies to Hezbollah. There were no direct threat between from Hezbollah or any other Iranian proxies on Egypt. The only reason why Egypt is opposing the Iranian proxies is mainly, or Iran, is mainly to please Saudi Arabia, which is its main ally in the region. And taking from Havy's point about how people adored Hassan Nasrallah in 2006, I remember very well at that time I was a junior researcher at a big think tank in Egypt, and we ran a survey bringing some names on the survey from all over the world, asking who is the man mostly admired by the Egyptian people. And number one was Hassan Nasrallah. And it's really amazing to see how this has changed dramatically now. Now in Egypt, people are not just neutral towards the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, but they are also celebrating it. They are excited that Israel is taking action against Iranian proxies. When we look at Turkey and Erdogan, it's a different story. Maybe some people would think that Turkey and Iran are friends. And they have good relationships, and because we see them all the time shaking hands, they support the same Islamist organizations in the region, and they support also the same radical Islamist ideology in the region. But in reality, Turkey and Iran, they have a lot of conflicts in common. They disagree on almost the majority of regional conflicts, including the conflicts in Iraq, the Kurdistan area, and Kurdistan region, and the Kurdish group there, and how to deal with them. They disagree even on the war in Azerbaijan, on which each of them is taking the side of a different fighter, of a different faction, I mean, inside Azerbaijan. So they disagree on many issues. on many issues. Even they disagree on the issue of oil and oil exportation in the regions that they dominate. So, and above all, of course, they have their major ideological difference as Sunni, Turkey representing the Sunni world, and Erdogan has these big ambitions of dominating the Sunni world and being the Muslim caliphate of the Sunni world, and Iran, which has this big ambition of being this exact leader of the Muslim world. Of course, they come from the Shia background, but they still see themselves the most qualified to lead the Islamic world. However, when we look at Turkey specifically, it's also surprising, before I go to Turkey's regional policy, that not all the Turkish people support Erdogan's policies in terms of what's happening right now in Gaza and Turkey's relationship with Israel. There is an overwhelming majority of liberal voices inside Turkey, whom I know many of them personally, who are opposing Erdogan's narrative on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And they are even very angry with what he's saying because they think it will hurt Turkey's relationship with Israel and thus complicate Turkey's situation in the Eastern Mediterranean. I mean, the geopolitical conflicts that Turkey historically has been going through with other neighbors like Cyprus and Greece. So to understand why Turkey is behaving in this way, we have first to understand that although Turkey is now ruled by an Islamist, radical Islamist actually leader, it is still a secular country. And people there value their nationalism and value their secularism to the extent that they are putting great pressure on the Erdogan regime, regardless of what Erdogan keeps saying about the region and so. And part of this sense of nationalism and secularism actually goes in match with Erdogan's somehow big ambitions to expand within the region. And after Turkey has already failed in the past years in being part of Europe, they are now trying to be part of the Turkic world, the leader of the Turkic world, and also the leader of the Middle East. And as I was explaining in the previous segment, the absence of major Middle Eastern leaders like Egypt and Syria, and the fact that now the region is led by just wealthy Gulf states that don't have much experience in politics or regional affairs, has given Turkey a chance to have bigger ambition about going into the Middle East and playing the role of the bigger sister. Turkey has been dedicating a lot of resources in the past 5 years, since 2019, to achieving this goal, having an influence on the Middle East through either diplomatic influence or economic influence. Right now, Turkey, for example, is having massive investments in Egypt. It ranges between $6 billion right now, and the goal is annually, and the goal is to raise it to $15 billion. And it's all made by Turkish investors who came to Egypt and started investing, and this all happened within only 3 years, if you think about it. So this leap is very impressive. The second thing that defines Turkey's regional policies is the geopolitical complexities in the Eastern Mediterranean region. Turkey is somehow tied to its borders, despite being the country in the Eastern Mediterranean region with the largest border, the largest maritime border, or the largest space inside the Mediterranean. It cannot enjoy any of the wealth of the Mediterranean, either petroleum, gas, or anything in the Mediterranean. Why? Because there was a treaty called the Lausanne Agreement, written about 100 years ago in the fog of war between the Ottoman Empire at that time and the Greeks and so, and forced Turkey to give certain islands to Greece, and thus it has become impossible for Turkey to have the right for exploration for gas in the Middle East. in the Eastern Mediterranean. So the only way, and of course this is causing a huge economic problem inside Turkey, because Turkey consumes about gas that's worth of about $50 billion per year. So its mission in the past few years was somehow to court the countries in the Eastern Mediterranean, especially Egypt and Israel, after their successful cooperation in the field of gas exploration and exportation, to be their third partner. And they came with a very interesting project saying that we will form a triangle of cooperation between Turkey, Egypt, and Israel, where the gas will be explored by Israel, sent to Egypt, Egypt liquefies the gas, and then sent to Turkey. And Turkey takes whatever it wants from it and export the rest to Europe. And thus the three countries will be wealthy and happy. And they started already working on that. And in the years 2022 and 2023, we saw amazing cooperation between the three countries. And I remember actually just 1 week before October 7 happens, I was speaking at the Atlantic Council here in Washington. On a panel, on my right side, there was someone from Israel, and on my right side, on my left side, there was someone from Turkey. And the three of us were so naively speaking about how the Eastern Mediterranean is changing, and finally we're going to see peace happening between Turkey, Egypt, and Israel. But it didn't take long until we were proven wrong by October 7. So all the movements that Turkey has been taking in the past few years, courting Gulf states, winning Egypt's favor and support, and even approaching the rapprochement with Israel that was successful to a certain extent, I would say it was all to serve Turkey's interests. And sadly, October 7 has changed this scenario dramatically. Right now, we are seeing Egypt and Turkey cooperating together on the expense of Israel. And they're thinking that they will win together, they will succeed together. But actually, I'm sure it will not take them too long to see that it's impossible to do anything in the Eastern Mediterranean or to succeed in the Eastern Mediterranean without including Israel, because Israel is an integral part of this region. Israel is the most successful country economically and politically, and it's the only democratic country in this region, and ignoring it will definitely lead to failure. So thank you.
Dalia, Hussein, Havi, Andrew, I want to thank you for your insights and perspectives. I would add before the Q&A part, just following what you said, Dalia, you know, in this ever-changing landscape of the Middle East, today's enemies are tomorrow's best friend and vice versa. So talking about Turkey and Egypt, not so long ago, they were in a very bad relationship. Now it's changed. Tomorrow it may change again. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now heading to the part of the Q&A, and we are very much looking forward to your questions. I will just make a short note. Question is a short sentence that ends with question mark. Okay? All right? Thank you.
Thanks. Not exactly an Israel question, but explain Qatar as it relates to your comments about the Gulf nation, and why is Qatar seemingly such a provider to Hamas, and why is Qatar seemingly such a provider to student disruptions in the U.S., as well as funding U.S. colleges?
Can I just say something? Good thing I'm not the speaker. Whoever feels that they want to answer, whoever feels that they're the most...
You're very welcome.
Yeah, and then someone else can follow.
Okay, I can try answering that. To understand what they're doing, you have to go back to 1996 when the emir executed a coup against his dad. And after he knocked his dad out of the country, the other Gulf countries did not really take the side of the new emir, and especially the Wahhabi establishment. One thing you have to know about Qatar is that there are two Wahhabi countries in the world. One of them is Saudi Arabia, and the other one is Qatar, and that's it. After 9/11, the UAE and Saudi Arabia were burnt because 15 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia and 2 were from the UAE. So they went in the direction against Islamism. They went in the opposite direction. And the Wahhabism that was being repressed in Saudi Arabia, all of it moved to Qatar. And now Qatar was trying to benefit because the Qataris wanted legitimacy. So they housed these radical Wahhabis. And at the same time, before they got the Wahhabis, they were nurturing the Muslim Brotherhood. Many leaders from the Muslim Brotherhood who were being ejected from Egypt starting the 1960s moved to Qatar and were taken care of and made it their home. And they were the ones who designed the curriculum. They were the ones who designed so many things, the state TV and the state university. So Qatar is now based on the idea that we were talking about, Islamism, not Islam, by the way, just Islamism. And Islamism is when you get Islam, the religion, and make a government out of it. Islam is the religion that people can worship at home like every other religion. So Islamism is what defines Qatar as we speak. And like we were saying, Islamism says, okay, we are opposed to everything Western culture, Western sports, food, you name it, traditions. But these Islamists, what they have in mind is not culture, it's a political program. So what you see Qatar is doing now, it started to spite the others, but now it's become their thing, and they make enormous use of these movements. And you can see that, for example, I'll just give you one example about Qatar. You guys have probably heard of the BDS movement, these guys who want to boycott Israel. And these BDS movements, if you invite one Israeli writer to a conference in Dubai, they will raise hell against the conference, the organizers, and the UAE. Now, in the World Cup that was held in Qatar, because Qatar couldn't, the World Cup license came from the international organization, FIFA, so Qatar had to commit that if they host the World Cup, they have to accept people from everywhere, spectators from everywhere. So Qatar took in 10,000 Israeli spectators with direct flights from Ben Gurion to Doha Airport, to the extent that Qatar had to set up exceptional consular services for these Israelis. And they were there. They were in Doha for a whole month watching the games. Now get this, BDS, who raises hell over everyone, didn't say a word over Qatar. And many of us started challenging them. So, come on, guys, that's your thing. You're not angry. And this tells you where BDS is getting its funding from. So, and they're doing this everywhere. They're doing, the Georgetown University. I call Georgetown University the Al Jazeera of universities because it's by far the most supportive of Qatar. One of the Qatari royals sit on the board of Georgetown University. If you go, this last week they had a symposium at Georgetown Doha, and this symposium was the title was Imagining Palestine, but the lineup of speakers were anyone who's Hamas or Muslim Brotherhood, and of course everyone was talking against U.S. imperialism, settler colonialism. They were vouching, or they were calling for a multipolar world. So, and you sit there and think, is Georgetown okay with this? I mean, is an American university okay with opposing spreading of the U.S. culture and liberty and freedom? But sometimes it's just the money. I think if my math is right, over the past 10 years, Georgetown has taken at least $700 million from the Qataris. So I guess money talks.
Can I add to this? Because thank you, Hussein, about Georgetown. I'm doing my master's at Georgetown right now, and I'm like, really? Oh, okay. But Qatar's role is obviously in funding all of these infiltrations that we see, including actual funding of Hamas, actual funding and supporting of all of the Iranian-backed elements in militias and terrorist groups that were basically committing terrorist attacks and atrocities all over the Middle East, and specifically in Israel. We know what happened on October 7th. But it's really, really important to point out that one of the most, one of the most horrible ways and basically most powerful ways that Qatar is spreading influence is through the media, because we cannot not talk about Al Jazeera. So Al Jazeera is basically completely funded by Qatar, and it literally incites and promotes terrorism and the murder of innocent people, specifically against Israelis, against the Jewish people, glorifies Hamas. And what's really interesting is that in English, Al Jazeera takes the role of being basically left-leaning, talks about LGBTQ rights, things that you will not ever have in Al Jazeera Arabic or by the terrorist groups that they support in this part of the world where they murder gay people because they're gay, for example. But also the fact that, the United States, we have one of our biggest military bases in Qatar, and that we're not doing much about it. I think there's just a lot to talk about here in terms of Al Jazeera, Qatar's very malign role in the Middle East and all over the world, and the fact that we here in the United States should be doing more to stop this from happening and continuing to happen.
I want to add one point to this that's very important, actually, given all the protests we're seeing happening now on American campuses. You will be surprised to know that one of the reports that came out recently mentioned that the NGOs, like the Student for Palestinians for Justice.
Students for Justice in Palestine.
Yeah,
SJP.
and others who are organizing these protests receive their funding from Qatar. So this shows you how big is the influence of Qatar in the United States, and it definitely is serving the agenda of Iran and others. But let me also say something about Gulf countries. Although I am completely against Qatar, of course, and all of its policies, but if you compare it to other Gulf countries, like the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, unfortunately, Qatar is the most consistent with its policies. They are evil policies, but it is the most consistent among the two others. UAE keeps changing its positions every 5 years or less. Saudi Arabia is kind of lost since the Crown Prince came in power. They have big ambitions. They deserve to be the leaders of the region because of their size and economic power and so on, but still they don't have a clear strategy and they are not consistent with their policies. That's why Qatar is winning in every conflict, either in the Middle East or here, in the Western world in general.
Hi. Andrew, a question for you. I too am in media and marketing. I have my whole career and still am. And I agree with you about the social media bad actors. But what do we do about the fact that the bad actors are actually embedded in our mainstream media, the New York Times, NPR, the Washington Post, constantly writing inaccurate headlines? That's at best, right? And it's completely misleading information. So the bad actors are actually our journalists today. How do we fix that as a fellow media and marketing person?
Thank you for the question. It's a great question. I personally do not see a difference between the New York Times Twitter account and some random person's Twitter account. I mean, we put too much stock in institutions thinking that they're going to have all the answers. Nobody's perfect, nobody gets it right all the time. There are many great journalists. My background's in journalism, and I think it's so important to find independent journalists that are not working for these institutions that are absolutely all biased. There's not one. I have a chart tomorrow that I'll share that shows the actual biases relates to anti-Israel sentiment amongst media organizations. There's not one organization that's not free of bias. There's not one human that's free of bias. So we can't stop people from pushing these agendas, but I think when you look at this compared to Al Jazeera, for example, I mean, it just shows us that what we see is not necessarily what is real. I mean, that there are people who are actively trying to convince us of one perspective or another instead of just sharing the facts. And the challenge now, not to get political, but frankly, you know, post the 2016 and 2020 elections, Trump world is in a lot of ways a post-truth world. And not that these things weren't there before, but we are questioning things now we never have as Americans before. And I think that's healthy. I think it's a good thing. I think we want to get diverse perspectives, but we've got to get to the source of truth. And the problem now, the true problem, is there is no more truth because nobody believes anybody, right? So everybody understands this inherent bias. And I think that's why it's so important to, consume all the media, watch Fox and CNN, watch MSNBC, you know, and CNBC. Try to see what other people are talking about. Do your own investigative research to figure out the source of truth, and then just know that that's the case. I think a lot of people want to try to push their narrative once they find their reality, but I think ultimately it's really a personal choice we all have to make to either limit our media diet or expand it quite dramatically and start seeking diverse perspectives, because there just simply is, there's no media free of bias. And the journalists that work for them in most cases are beholden to these, you know, funded institutional biases that they have to actually stand behind. So that's a tricky one, but there are plenty of independent journalists out there that are finding content on the ground and are being actual sources of truth.
Let me just say one thing. Everyone here, by a show of hands, how many of you have heard of the Saudi journalist Khashoggi? Khashoggi. Khashoggi? Is that it? Okay, here we go. That's the. Okay, thank you. How many of you have heard of the Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh? Shireen Abu Akleh, the one. Okay, just. The one who was shot in Jenin recently, 2 years ago. The Al Jazeera journalist. Okay, thank you. Now, how many of you have heard of the Lebanese journalist Luqman Slim? As expected. Okay, so Luqman Slim is a personal friend. He was Shia born, like myself. And if you know Hezbollah is Muslim Shia. And Luqman was an outspoken opponent of Hezbollah. Khashoggi was killed in 2018, and you probably remember MSNBC, New York Times, State Department, everyone were going after MBS. Candidate Joe Biden announced Saudi Arabia as a pariah state. He said, I'll make them pariah because they killed the journalist. Shireen Abu Akleh, State Department, almost stopped the aid we send to Israel every year. So Luqman Slim was killed in 2021, and Shireen was killed in 2022. So he's between the two characters, and none of you have heard of him. He didn't make it to the New York Times, he didn't make it to MSNBC. The only statement from Washington was from Secretary of State Antony Blinken, in which he said, we urge the Lebanese judiciary to bring the perpetrators of the Slim crime to justice, and that was the end of it. And the reason I'm telling you this story is that there's a huge agenda that's driving much of the news coverage in this country, that you get 3 journalists, one of them was taken and shot dead, you know, and you never heard of him. Whereas the Al Jazeera correspondent, she went to the battlefield. She was not, you know, kidnapped and shot dead. Just my 2 cents.
And I will add one small anecdote. I'm too close. Now I'm too far. Welcome to my life. in the context of the war in Gaza, Al Jazeera has a military analyst. His name is Dweri. Faiz Dweri. He's an ex-Jordanian general. And this person is the former military analyst of Al Jazeera. He appears every night at Al Jazeera in Arabic, analyzing the situation in Gaza Strip. His analysis is totally, has nothing to do with the reality. His analysis is totally upside down, but he's doing that because this is the agenda of Al Jazeera. So it became, at some point, a mockery in the Arab world, because people in the Arab world knows what's going on in Gaza, and they understand what's going on in Gaza. So they understood that Al Jazeera and Dweri are actually selling them Bubamaisis, right? So in the Arab world, it became a slogan. The slogan is Halal Ya Dweri. Halal means in Arabic, analyze that. But it's being said in a very mocking and not respectful way, and rightly so, because it's totally upside down, because this is the agenda of Al Jazeera. And by the way, as part of the wonders of the Middle East, not so long ago, the same Al Dweri was a very, very bitter opponent of Al Jazeera. But then he got a nice checks, so,
Money talks.
Money talks.
Hi, I'm Sherry, and on behalf of all of us, I want to thank you all for being here and looking forward to tomorrow as well.
Thank you.
And my question is, from how you just educated us about, particularly about Qatar, how the blank did they become a mediator when they support Hamas? What is it, the consistency in their policies? Anyone?
Take this question. Yeah, I'll start, but I think Hussein also may have. I read some of your work, and I think he has also an interesting view on this. Actually, I would say, to start with, these ceasefire negotiations were a mistake from the very beginning. Negotiating with a terrorist organization like Hamas is a mistake. So with this understanding, we can know why Qatar called for these negotiations from the start. And actually, they started to speak about the ceasefire negotiations from the second day the war started, the retaliatory war of Israel against Hamas started. Qatar came up with a narrative of let's do ceasefire, guns is not going to solve the problem, but only peace or talking dialogue is going to solve the problem. Why Qatar did that? They needed to throw a lifeline for Hamas. And they did this, and they invited Egypt, unfortunately, because of their huge influence on Egypt. I mean, financially, economically, and as you know, Egypt is going through an economic crisis. So they somehow put Egypt, the Egyptian leadership, to join them in this so-called ceasefire talks or negotiations. For the United States, we are at the time of elections. The US president wanted to appear like playing a role outside of his reach in the Middle East, and that he's influential on a critical war that's going on. So it was also a good opportunity for the US administration to intervene. And we ended up in a situation that the three parts are meeting, are actually the three so-called mediators are playing for their domestic audience by saying that we have joined or we are moderating a ceasefire deal. But it did not lead to any result, and it will not going to lead to any positive result. The only way to deal with Hamas is to crush Hamas, to weaken it to the point that it does not represent any threat, neither to Israel nor to its Arab neighbors. So unless this happens, we are not allowed really to speak about any ceasefire or negotiations. Another important thing to say about ceasefire is that, yes, Hamas showed willingness to participate in ceasefire, but what you don't know is that in the ideology of Hamas and the radical Islamists in Qatar and so, or in Islam in general, there is this concept of hudna. Hudna means it's closer to be translated in English to the word truce, T-R-U-C-E. It's more about, it's not the end of jihad on Israel or on the West. It's actually a temporary pause to this jihad so we can rearm and regroup and come back and kill you. So this is basically how they think when they say, let's do ceasefire. They are not talking about peace at all. So I hope this answers.
Okay, let me just add that if you remember former President Obama, he had a famous slogan, don't do stupid stuff. And I think, because this is the same team from Obama that's running the foreign policy, and they tend to treat things in a manner of go away. You know, I don't want to deal with you because you cost me votes domestically. But anyway, I think Washington's role has been horrible in this. And they put different goals together. They said a ceasefire and a two-state solution. These are two opposite goals. A ceasefire lets Hamas survive. Hamas opposes two states. Two states requires peace. And, you know, look, people like us, we've been saying, and we support the war clearly. I support the war until we decimate Hamas. And like we say it in Hebrew, biyachad ninatzeach, that's the word. Yeah. So until the end, the same thing applies to Hezbollah. But you wouldn't know this if you're following the New York Times, because if you go back 10 months, all the headlines will be Hezbollah retaliates to Israel. You'd never know that it was Hezbollah that started this war. And the same thing applies to Hamas. So I think we played an enormous negative role in all of this. There's no truce, you know, I mean, and like Daria is saying, in their mind, in Hamas's mind, ceasefire means going back to October 6th. None of us wants to go back to October 6th.
Thank you, all of you, for a really inspiring afternoon. A little depressing at times, but I wanted to follow up on something that Dalia said, and that is Hamas needs to be crushed, is the only answer to Hezbollah and ultimately to the IRGC in Iran military.
It's the only solution to crush these organizations, to eliminate them, is the question.
So the question is mainly like, is the only solution to deal with these radical organizations, terrorist organizations, is to crush them, right? Yes. This is the question. I would say yes, but actually some people.
He asked if the only answer was military. That's what he asked, correct?
Military, yeah.
Oh, military. Look, actually, you have also to understand where they are coming from. They are mainly militant groups that are using Islam or this Islamist ideology as a justification and as a cover and as a way to recruit people. But their main goal, they look at them as a military group. They are already a military group. They have a mission, which is jihad against the West or against the US, which is the big evil in their eyes, or the big Satan, and Israel, which is the small Satan, as they call it. So with this mission in mind, yes, the only way to deal with them is definitely militarily. I know some people may argue, some scholars and some writers are arguing that it's impossible to eliminate Hamas. It's impossible to eliminate Hezbollah because these are, you know, terrorist organizations are ideas and they are impossible to be eliminated. But look at what is Israel doing now. It seems like Israel is doing this miracle happen and is already eliminating these terrorists. Israel has weakened Hamas to the point right now that it does not represent a threat anymore. Israel has been for 2 weeks or 3 weeks now, taking one leader of Hezbollah after the other until eventually today we had the head of Hezbollah himself being taken. So it's not impossible to crush a terrorist organization. It just needs proper cooperation between the good people in order to achieve that.
Let me just add a quick thing. These organizations wouldn't let us, the reason why we fled our country is that because these organizations use force at all times. And if this were not the case, I would be standing in the middle of the square in Baalbek arguing for Lebanese peace with Israel yesterday. But I can't do that because they kill me militarily. So if the ground was leveled and we could debate and we could elect, by the way, Hezbollah got 40% of the seats in the last election. They didn't make it to half the population. If we could debate, if we could beat them at the ballot box, if we could go on TV and say you're wrong, we want peace, then you'd be right. Why militarily? But they don't. They've left us just one choice. And by the way, this choice is known for anyone who grew up in the Middle East. It's called either kill or get killed. And that's how they play the game, unfortunately.
I just want to add one thing, because it is, and going back to the United States and its role, obviously our media is so important. But, the idea that the United States should be like a peacekeeper, but a peacekeeper from far. Like, oh, let's have a ceasefire. Let's not have a conflict. We're war worried. Like, we don't want to be involved in wars. We can't do that because the United States has an important role in the world. Look, obviously Israel is taking a leadership role right now in the region, which everybody's seeing. It's very essential. And I believe that, yes, media also plays a role in that education, along with military, victory, because you need a military victory, but also education and media play a big role in making that long-lasting change. In terms of the Iranian regime, because you brought it up, unfortunately, the current administration is not an administration that's actually backing our ally, Israel, in the way it should be. We even heard that with Hassan Nasrallah's strike, it wasn't even collaborated with the United States. The United States wasn't even informed before it happened. That's based on reports. I'm not sure how accurate that is. But this just to show that this is where the United States is right now. But it is important that the United States has a major role to play. If the United States is not present in supporting our allies, there are very bad actors that are in other parts of the world that would actually like to come into the Middle East and North Africa, and they're already trying to do that. And then we will have a very, very big problem because they would want to basically dominate the region. And we should not allow that. The United States is a very important power in terms of the values that we bring and the power that we bring and the support that we need to bring and sustain in the Middle East, North Africa. What happens in the Middle East does not stay in the Middle East. I truly believe that this is so true. And in terms of the Iranian regime, they're waiting basically to have a nuclear weapon. I think the United States has a role to play in supporting Israel and the rest of the region, or frankly, and the rest of the world to confront this issue that is potential and actually still very dangerous development that might happen at any moment.
I would like to bring a little bit different perspective regarding the question. Look, Hamas and Hezbollah are not going to disappear. It has to be clear. They're not going to disappear. The objective here in the end of the day is to limit as much as possible their ability to continue and to dictate their radical, violent agenda as they have been doing, unfortunately, quite successfully for the last 40 years. And to do that, you need three major elements to take place. First, you need to crush them militarily. The second thing that you need is to develop this, what I call through regional diplomacy, a frame that could maintain the closure of those organizations. And then there is another third significant, maybe the most significant component, and that is the question, what is going to be the inner discussion, politically, narrative, and so on, within the Palestinians vis-à-vis the role of Hamas? What is going to be the role of the inner discussion within the Lebanese vis-à-vis the role of Hamas? Because they are not going anywhere. They are not going to disappear. And so I think that these are things that we have to take into consideration when we talk about it. I think that would be the right, accurate way to present the objective, and in a I would say, reasonable or relevant manner.
Hi. So this question is probably most appropriate for Hussein, but in reading lately how accurate Israel has been with their bombings, they know where some of their missiles are hiding in houses. They knew what to do with the pagers and the radios and whatnot. Is this all being coordinated with Israeli spies in Lebanon, or is there inside people within Lebanon or Hezbollah? They must be getting this information somewhere. Do you understand the question?
I think I do.
But you can't answer it.
I can't answer for Israel.
Hussein cannot speak for Israel, neither can I, because, you want the long version or the short version?
The accurate version.
I can't tell you. Look, I'll just make it very shortly. You're looking at an outcome of a very, very long, hard work of intelligence gathering. We are looking at something that is over many, many years. And it's not something that is being done overnight. And obviously, the tendency, particularly in the West, to go to the more sensational things, which is understood. You live your life in Hollywood, that's understood. But I would say one thing about, from intelligence perspective, as much as I can say. When you look at the story of the Beeper attacks, there are two components to that. One is the sensational one, which of course, understandably, everyone is talking about. But I'll bring another aspect that comes from a mindset of intelligence, which is, I think, very interesting, particularly for people who are not coming from this world. The interesting thing about that issue is that what we have seen is actually a manifestation of a very, very sophisticated, thoroughly calculated, meticulously tailored chess game that has been done in many, many phases. And the interesting thing about it is that doing something like that requires the ability, from an intelligence perspective, to be able to plan your 4, 5, 6 moves ahead, to have, for each and every single move, to have plan A, plan B, plan C. And for each stage, you need to have the ability to know in advance what your rivalry's stage is going to be like. So you could actually dialogue with that. I will add in a kind of like, you can quote me, but of course I will deny that I said that. But what you are looking at is an act that is called to drive something to something. This was a chess game that was basically driving somebody to somewhere that you wanted him to be in.
Okay, first of all, thank you. This is such a compelling afternoon. Really appreciate it, and it's so good to see you all not in a Zoom box. Rapid fire questions, 3. The first is, how would you amplify your message when it comes to educating and re-educating people, students who are on campuses like Queers for Palestine? That's first. Second is probably for Andrew, and it's a question around AI. If there's so much disinformation in the internet, how does it impact the algorithm around like ChatGPT so that you can write an accurate summary of what's happening? Or is it that you input information and it might spew out inaccurate summary of what's happening? And third, for each of you, are you optimistic or pessimistic?
I mean, I can just start about the conversation here in the United States is very, obviously it's been indoctrinated, right? Because the students are getting false narratives and false information, which is something I've experienced growing up in an Arab, country. I've seen this, I've seen how that works. And obviously there's a role for social media because there's amplifications of specific narratives, and there's an algorithm issue that is unknown, and this is an area where Andrew will talk probably more about it. But there are basically elements who are adversary to our country, adversaries to our beliefs, that are infiltrating the minds and hearts of younger generations in the West and in the United States. And that's on TikTok, that's in our academia. There are information about the Iranian regime, for example, funding the protests that were happening pro-Hamas and against Israel in our college campuses. Now, in terms of the conversation, I think what's really being and I've had conversations with students, people like me who want peace are not, as they think, being anti-Palestinian. It's actually the opposite. They are basically being fed that Israel is the enemy of the Palestinians. And in my opinion, Hamas and terrorist groups are the enemy of the Palestinians and not Israel. Israel is the actual future partner and neighbor, and even there are many Palestinians who are holding Israeli citizenship. And what's happening here in our conversation in the United States, unfortunately, is that they're just saying Israel is doing this to the Palestinians. Well, do you know what's actually happening to the Palestinians by other Palestinians? Do you know about the corruption? Do you know about the human rights abuses? And I think that changes the conversation. So this is, I think, the approach that's really important to have, is to actually help them understand the reality, which is that a lot of Israelis and organizations, when I went to the borders of Gaza, I actually saw that the IDF was making agriculture programs to help Palestinian farmers in Gaza to do better in their own farms. You would never see that anywhere else. And this is just, to let people here realize this is a very complex issue, and the only way is for the Palestinians to realize that we are going to have to coexist with Israel. The solution is not from the river to the sea, which means the annihilation of Israel, which is the Jewish homeland, to the ancient, the Jewish people are ancient to the region, to this specific part of the world. And it's actually in Islam, in the Quran, that Israel is mentioned 47 times. And Moses is mentioned 136 times. People don't realize that Israel is actually a part of even Islam, and there's so much gap in knowledge and so much to be shared that I think that if anybody really has a candid conversation, an open conversation about the realities, you will come out changing a lot of people's minds and hearts. The solution is peace. The solution is never to follow extremist terrorist organizations that murder people because of their identity. And yes, Israel is going to stay and thrive, and the Palestinians need to find a way with Israel to have a solution where they could both coexist in peace and harmony.
Just add to what Avi said. What we do is when we speak out, even though we don't have Al Jazeera, this is connected to herd behavior and peer pressure. So anyone, if you read a story about the times when there were witch hunts, anyone who reads the story would say, well, that's stupid. If I were living at the time, of course I wouldn't have joined. The odds are you would have joined. No one wants to stand out. I have 54 cousins, and we have a WhatsApp group, family group, and it's like a meat market. Everyone is just discussing, all day long. Just one issue when we start the discussion, free Palestine from the river to the sea, we support Nasrallah, we love, death to Israel. Now, I'm the dissenting voice, clearly, you can tell. And of course, everyone picks an argument with me, but amazingly, at least 10 to 15 of the cousins reach out privately, and they say, we support you, but we can't say it in the group because, they'll shame us. And so the issue here is that when these people who are silent and disagree see other people like us come out and say it's not a taboo and you're not crazy and that's fine and Israel is okay and you can have peace with Israel. When we start saying the word peace, the odds are that people will come out of cracks. Now, not as much as we want them to, because of course there's still social shaming and security threat to yourself and to others, but that's the point, you need people to start coming out.
I just didn't want to add anything else to that before I jumped into my favorite topic, ChatGPT. I'm glad you brought that up. So it's actually interesting. If I understand the question correctly, it's basically how ChatGPT plays a role in battling disinformation, or is it going to perpetuate it beyond repair, right? The newer versions of ChatGPT are incredibly sophisticated, and if you give it the right information, you give it the right context, it will literally create anything you want in terms of text. I would say image generation isn't quite there yet. Some of the deepfake technology is impressive, but we pretty much all have a litmus test for what we know looks real or not. The problem is it's so easy now for somebody to take a biased, let's say New York Times anti-Israel slant in some cases, start a website, publish that content, and share it on Facebook. Now Facebook, and I guess my point here is it's more, in my mind, about distribution and personal responsibility in terms of what we actually allow to expose ourselves to, because there's just literal filth out of the internet. Havy and I were talking the other day about some of the content on YouTube Kids, and while it might seem innocent enough, if you actually read into some of the stuff with the AI generative capabilities of being able to crank out content, smart disinformation campaign. I'm not giving anybody ideas, and hopefully nobody ever does this, but if it's not already happening, you could use subliminal messaging in children's television, never saying anything overtly to change people's perspective. So I think when you look at social media right now, Facebook's making tremendous efforts in having AI that fact checks these articles. And I think the kind of scary part about this is we can flag anything, right? So we can't stop the creation of disinformation. We can only stop the spread of misinformation. So in order to do that, I just think it's more of a personal choice that we need to make. But there are tools that are being built into Meta and into Twitter that actually say, hey, some people have commented on the authenticity of said image, or this may not be accurate. I'm also seeing in some of my work with marketing, particularly with Jewish institutions, people have just been recently getting flagged, all of our content getting flagged as hate speech, just by virtue of being Jewish, because that's a way that Facebook will actually manually review that page, take it down for a period of time, and this is something that people can do to stop bad actors. If you see something that looks like a fake, obviously fake news website, it just needs to be reported. So I think it's on us to actually take that role in reporting stuff, but there is a consequence to that where people are very selective. And the long and short of it is, if done properly and configured properly, AI can be incredibly powerful in the wrong hands, but it's more about our critical thinking skills and our media literacy, not only in this country, but globally, especially as people get more access to information, just to really understand how to separate fact from fiction. And it's going to get harder. So am I optimistic or pessimistic overall from my perspective in this lane? I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm worried. I think there's a lot of implications for the next few years in terms of digital media, social media, content, AI, disinformation, and bots. But when you hear these incredible perspectives from my co-panelists, and you hear how much better the world's getting in so many ways, despite these very difficult things that will happen along the way. I'm very optimistic, and I think peace, I truly believe peace is possible in our lifetime, so.
There you go. I would add shortly to that, Rafi, it's about hard work, reaching to these young people, these campuses and others. This is exactly what we are doing right now. I can tell you that 3 days ago I was at Columbia University. I had an event with students of Hillel in Columbia University. That was one of the most significant experiences because they need the understanding. They need the context, they need the nuance, they need intelligent explanation to be able to navigate the way. And it's a hard work because I can tell you about myself and Maya, we are driving around from place to place. We are crossing North America. We are now in this educational mission. And there is no magic wand. You have to get to these people. You have to talk to these people. You have to stand in front of them. You have to answer the questions and to basically provide them with the knowledge and the tools and the skills that they are so badly need. This is one aspect of this, the way to address this challenge. And I totally second Andrew when he said, cautiously optimistic. Well, I'm optimistic because, to put it less diplomatically, I was born an idiot. So I will just thank you for your question. I'll try to refer to that, but I want to be respectful of the gentleman behind you that was standing politely. That's okay. Thank you. Savranut. Savranut.
First of all, thank you. Very inspiring, the group. Looking forward to tomorrow's dialogue, open dialogue, and from the heart. So I have these two questions. One is, yes, Israel's trying to crush the Hamas. However, how do you crush an idea? That's number 4 for you. Nachon?
It's already included.
Subject to interpretation and context. Secondly is, maybe you mentioned it, the country or not, Israel has a close neighbor, Jordan. Where is Jordan? Where is the prince and his wife in this political dialogue? Thank you, and looking forward to talking to you tomorrow.
Sure.
So I will answer the part, sorry?
Which question are we taking?
No, the gentleman's question.
Yeah, I will answer the part about crashing the idea. Actually, Hamas is not an idea. Hamas is a terrorist organization. The idea is radical Islamist and terrorist groups from which Hamas, Hezbollah, ISIS, and all the others come. And it is possible to crush a terrorist organization, but the idea of radical Islamism, not the idea of Hamas. I mean the idea of radical Islamism, the idea of abusing the political complexities of the region to appear as, resistance groups and freedom fighters will continue to exist. Actually, Hezbollah itself came out, and Hussein, correct me if this is not accurate, it came out of a leftist organization. Right? So it started not as an Islamist organization, but as a leftist organization. So when you think about it, yes, the idea of the radicalism will always exist. But these terrorist organizations has to be crushed, militarily, I mean. And then eventually the idea we can work on or crush also through what Heavy mentioned earlier, education, and the effort that people like Avi and myself and Hussein and all the others, Heavy also through Yalla and Andrew through his work on social media. This is how we will crush the idea, but of course it will not happen overnight. It will take long work because you're trying to rewrite the minds of the so many people who were brainwashed by this narrative for so long.
Well, quickly, Al-Qaeda was an idea. Where's bin Laden, Al-Qaeda now? Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi Ba'ath, where are they now? There's a long list, even Hitler and Nazism. I mean, we still have Nazis, but we don't have Hitler. So we can crush the ability of these ideas to govern and their machine and their apparatus. Now, if someone sits at home and has a picture of Ahmad Yassin, the founder of Hamas, there's nothing much we can do about it as long as it's home, it's not out in public. To your question on Jordan, Jordan is really an interesting place, and the king is a good friend of the West, of the US and Israel. And the best asset of this king, in one word, is access. He gives us access to enormous amount of intelligence and support and security and cooperation. But this king thinks that he has to strike a balancing act because he has to be populist, and everyone in his kingdom, most of them who were originally from the other side of the river, he thinks that these people love the Palestinians and he has to be here and there. When October 7 broke out, I think he went a bit beyond taking the side of his population. I mean, their statements became a bit nasty, so to speak. And what happened is that, you probably know this, 20% of Jordanian water comes from Israel's desalination. That's per the agreement between them. If Israel stops giving them the water, they'll die out of thirst, literally. And when the agreement was due for renewal, the king sent his foreign minister begging the Israelis from the back door, of course, saying, please, just the water. And the Israelis were thinking, okay, now you're coming back to us. But again, the way Israel thought about this, and correctly, I assume, and the way America thought about this is the worst option that we have. If this guy crumbles, the Shia militias and Hezbollah and Hamas will instantly take over. Anyway, they're breathing down his neck. They're smuggling drugs and arms from Syria. They're trying to smuggle arms through the river to the West Bank to Hamas and the Lion's Den. So he's not ideal, but I think he's the best shot we get.
So I wanted to ask a question of our three Arabic-speaking panelists, and I hate to be a cynical voice because with your opening narratives, each you provided a really compelling story of how you went from fairly mainstream in your respective societies, very antagonistic position on Israel and the Jewish people to one that was more embracing, and talked about the fact that in each of your societies there's a larger contingent of individuals who are moving in the same direction. That's compelling to me as an American Jew. It's compelling, I believe, to a certain fraction of the progressives on American campuses and elsewhere in American society. But when we think about change on the ground in the Middle East and a change in international relations internal to the region, if we look at the governments of each of your countries, they are already governing from a perspective that is in many ways out of step with a large segment of the population, right? Since the Arab Spring, it became clear that in Egypt, a huge portion of the Egyptian population sympathized with the Egyptian Brotherhood, and they were just put down. So their views were disregarded. If we look at Syria, there was a massive attempt to overthrow an Alawite government that was a tiny portion of the population, and it was unsuccessful. When we look at Iraq,
may I interrupt and just ask what is the question?
It's coming to a question. So my question is, what do you see as the mechanism by which a change in the view amongst the broad population would actually translate to a change in the way that intergovernmental relations and regional cooperation or relations would be transformed in the region when they're already non-responsive to their populations on so many issues of more immediate concern.
Okay, so I mean, I can talk about this just a little bit, because when you mentioned countries like Syria, I think to an extent Egypt, Iraq, there is a failed state situation going on in these countries. I mean, I know that Egypt is not as clear yet, but it is happening. Syria absolutely is crumbled as a country, as a society, because of the way the Assad regime, like you said, basically their Alawite minority, the family scared the Alawites who are closer to the Shia Islam, and then they were aided by the elements that are backed by the Iranian regime, and there were a lot of slaughter that happened by Hezbollah, by the way, and other factions who are extremist Shia factions working on behalf of the Iranian regime, and they murdered so many Sunni, right? So now you have also the Christians are suffering in these countries. The Kurds are basically wanting to have their own areas because they do have the historical right, but that was never recognized. And that is just all over these specific countries. Egypt is a different case, but it is also not a country that is, and it's, it's not thriving right now, let's say the least. There's a lot of economic and divisions within the country, a rise of extremism that is happening. However, there are countries in the region, and we can start with the Abraham Accord countries. So there are countries that are more stable countries, they're moderate Arab countries, that have already made these major steps to create a new era of collaboration and relations with Israel on many levels, including the people's levels. And I think this is a major cornerstone that could be built upon. Now, of course, the expansion of the Abraham Accords would be really great, of course, for everybody in the region. And I think if that happens between Israel and Saudi Arabia, that would be a game changer, like Ambassador Michael Herzog said in an interview on Yalla, when they were actual talks happening before the October 7th terrorist attack. And that's what the Iranian regime and all the terrorist groups like Hamas, like Hezbollah know very well, that this peace is going to change the dynamics in these countries. There's going to be umbrellas where people could speak freely about peace with Israel, which has never happened before, where there could be educational initiatives, there could be actual collaboration, media will change, and that's so, so essential. And I think this is where things will happen. And I know that these destabilized countries will eventually collapse one way or the other, in my opinion. And we don't know what's going to happen next, but at least there will be a momentum that has started, and it will reach them. I think a lot of people are ready, and specifically in the countries that suffered by the Iranian regime and backed militias the most. I know.
Okay,
Maya.
I just want to be respectful of the fact that we're supposed to end at 4, and I want people to hear the ending. But so, Havi, I apologize. Come back tomorrow to hear more. We hope, first of all, that you will come back tomorrow. I just want to, and please encourage your friends. I just want to say one thing. Some people asked how we know each other. We have been collaborating on many different projects over many years through our organization inside the Middle East. And when Ron Schuster asked us to do a program, we thought there would be nothing more powerful than bringing our colleagues to bring them in, people that are not normally part of the conversation, not normally part of the Beth El stage, to be with us. So we really hope you'll come tomorrow. We have a full day of sessions. People can come for an hour, they can come for a day. Please tell your friends. We hope you enjoyed this. And we do all kinds of projects together, so if this does interest you, on October 10th at 7 p.m., there's actually a meeting. In the booklet here, also you have all the bios, by the way. In this booklet, there's information, there's my contact. If you think this is important and you want to be part of a conversation, how can we grow this and bring this kind of education to more people, please email me, call me, everything's here. And we really want to try to grow this, so you're invited to the meeting October 10th at 7. Ron, do you want to say? Thank you all for coming. I'm sorry we're 10 minutes late.
Please give a big round of applause. I mean, this is just wonderful. So, I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. Give yourselves an applause because you guys came here. So, spread the word and hope to see you tomorrow. Bring your questions.